you all very much for joining us today. Let me say it's an honor for me to be here. I don't actually specialize in Islamic legal studies, so I'm here very much to learn and hopefully contribute a little bit of something that could be of value, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Today I'll be speaking about Ismaili interpretations of the Sharia, and before I sort of problematize the topic, let me just quickly introduce to you who the Ismailis are. The Ismailis are a branch of Shia Muslims. As some of you know, the majority of Shia Muslims are 12-verse Shi'is who believe in 12 Imams, with the 12th Imam being hidden, and with the religious authority often falling to the class of Ayatollahs and Mujtahids. The Ismailis follow the same number, they follow a common number of Imams with the 12ers up to Imam Ja'far Sadiq. After Imam Ja'far Sadiq, the Ismailis believe that Ismail, his elder son, and his descendants are the true Imams, and then the Ismailis themselves are subdivided. The majority of the Ismailis today are Nizari Ismailis, and unlike other Shi'i Muslim groups, the Imamate for the Nizari Ismailis continues to be manifest in the world. So the Nizari Ismailis follow a line of visible Imams. His Highness Aga Khan IV is the 49th Imam of the Nizari Ismailis. And my talk today will really speak to how the Nizari Ismailis have conceptualized and practiced the Sharia, the problems involved therein from an academic perspective on the topic. The last four Ismaili Imams have had the title of Aga Khan, which is something you're familiar with. So what is sort of the problematization here? Well, on one hand, Ismaili theology grants the Imams the infallible authority to modify religious practice as they see fit, something that we have seen happening through history. You don't have an Ismaili fiqh until the mid-10th century, and that's during the time of the Fatimid Caliphate, or Khilafah. Then the Nizari Ismailis on certain occasions actually abolished parts of the Sharia by the authority and guidance of the Imam. And in the present day, what we see is among the Nizari Ismailis, there is no use of fiqh. Sharia worship rituals are not practiced, a different sort of worship rituals are practiced. And even the term Sharia is not really a common watchword in contemporary Nizari Ismaili vocabulary. So all of this raises the question, what is the Nizari Ismaili position on Sharia? Is there a coherent Ismaili position on Sharia in the first place? So my preliminary contention is that the Ismaili theorization and historical practice of the Sharia suggests that they see the Sharia as a contingent set of prophetically constructed rules and regulations subject to the continuing authority and interpretation of the Ismaili Imam. In the present time, I would venture to submit that the Ismaili Imam conceptualizes Sharia broadly, not as fiqh, but as ethics. So this is what I'll try to sort of talk about today. In some parts, I'll be moving fast, and we can return to certain points in question period based on what the audience would like. So the Nizari, the Ismaili theorization of the Sharia really begins with the Ismaili theology of revelation. As some people are aware, for most Muslims, 12 Shi'is and various Sunni schools, revelation is an event, a process, whereby God's speech, regardless of whether it's eternal or created, but God's speech is conveyed in the Arabic language, first to the angel Gabriel, and then the angel Gabriel verbally conveys God's speech in Arabic to Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad recites some of that verbatim, which is Quran, and some of it he conveys in a non-verbatim way, which is called the Sunnah. Then what you have is the various fiqh methods are applied to these revealed sources by scholars, and that's sort of how we have a very broad set of interpretations of fiqh schools. The Ismaili position on revelation, however, differs. I thought it would be good to show you from a primary authoritative source in the Ismaili tradition on how the Ismailis conceive of what the nature of revelation is. And the blue text here is the words of the 14th infallible Imam, at least that's how the Ismailis will see their Imam. So the 14th Imam al-Mu'izz. And I'm underscoring that because this would be sort of an authoritative statement in the Ismaili tradition. What the Imam Mu'izz explains in this blue text here is that what God conveyed, what God sent down to Prophet Muhammad was not verbal speech, but it was an immaterial, universal light. So almost in a mystical sense of light. And that the Prophet Muhammad experienced that light, and he was not able to convey the light in its original form to his audience because they lacked the spiritual receptivity for that revealed light. So the Prophet Muhammad, through his own faculty, through his own intellect, imagination, and faculty of speech, he coined Arabic language phrases, statements, symbols to express that revealed light. And what the Prophet Muhammad coined was the Quran. So the last part of the quote says, according to the Imam, the combination of the letters, the expressions, and the composition of the expressions is due to the Prophet. So the Quran, is the speech of God, kalam, Allah, and the word, qawl, of the Messenger of God. And this is a major difference from the standard views that we often hear. And what that means is that the actual lawgiver of Sharia, as embodied, as Sharia is contained in the Quran and the prophetic statements, the lawgiver is Muhammad. That this does not deny that Muhammad is divinely inspired. So the sort of alternative model is what you see here. Muhammad is divinely inspired, but not verbally. Rather, he's divinely inspired through a spiritual emanation, and what he gives contains the Sharia. And then, following Muhammad, the Ismaili Imams have authority over all the revealed sources. They themselves are divinely inspired, and they continue to provide instruction and exegesis, ta'lim and ta'wil, of revelation. So that's sort of like the Ismaili model. And that has wide-ranging implications for the whole thing. We can turn to the earliest Ismaili enactments of the Sharia, and I begin here with a quote of Robert Gleave in his book Scripturalist Islam, where Robert Gleave has observed how the very presence of an imam held to be infallible by his community actually, in his words, it stunted the development of Shi'i fiqh. The point is, you had an imam present, the imams answered legal questions as they occurred, sort of like an ad hoc basis. Very much similar to how Prophet Muhammad in the Quran addressed many issues as they occurred. So the imams in the Shi'i tradition kept doing that, and for groups like the Ismailis, where there's always an imam present, the imam was there, giving legal rulings, giving guidance. So there was no need to come up with an usul fiqh system. There was no need for an ulama fuqaha class to emerge. But what we do have is, there were, in the early centuries, we don't have much information, but the Ismailis are using sort of what you can call token Shi'i legal positions on some issues, and it's a small range of issues. And finally, during the Fatimid Caliphate, where Sunni fiqh is emerging, and usul fiqh is emerging, you have finally the Ismaili Imams commissioned Qazi Numan to come up with an Ismaili fiqh. And that resulted, it was a 20-year project, it resulted in this book called the Da'aim al-Islam, the Pillars of Islam. And on one hand, the Da'aim al-Islam rejects all the Sunni fiqh methodology. It makes Quran and Sunnah the only two root principles, and Sunnah here includes the teachings of the Imam. It also proposes 7 pillars of Islam, where wilayah, allegiance and obedience to the Imam, is the chief pillar. So on one hand, the Ismailis are engaging in some sort of legal, like fiqh language, but they're doing it on their own terms. And in practice, the product of Fatimid Ismaili law was a compromise between 12er Shi'i, Zaidi, and Sunni Maliki fiqh. So it may not even be about taking various sort of different outcomes, but premising the law on different principles. Then, at the same time as this fiqh discourse is going on, Ismaili philosophers in the Fatimid era are giving sort of rational proofs on why there should be a law. Like sort of what's the purpose of the law. I've given 3 examples here. It's not merely about obeying God to earn God's pleasure. That's actually never the reason cited. Rather, the law was seen as a means to an end, a means by which human beings could cultivate virtue, cultivate spiritual perfection, and access that spiritual light that came to the prophet. It's almost like the prophet received that light, he wants others to experience it, so he devised practices for the community whereby if they practice those rituals and follow those laws, they can come closer to that light. That was sort of like the theory behind the law. At the same time, we have this notion of double worship, adaptations, as the Ismailis call it. The idea that the outward practice of Sharia and the rituals is the Zahiri worship, exoteric worship, and at the same time, all these rituals have a symbolic, you could say coded meaning that's only known to the Imam and the elite of the community, and that the believer was required to learn those esoteric meanings through his or her intellect. And that learning was seen as the Batini worship, or worship of knowledge. The Qadi al-Numan may have written the Aim al-Islam, which is like fiqh, Sharia, but then he also wrote Ta'wil al-Da'im al-Islam, the inner exegesis of the pillars of Islam, which is, of course, rarely talked about. Then, as part of this theory, there is a notion of abrogation. I don't mean abrogation as commonly understood. Here's what I mean by abrogation. So the Ismailis believe that there were 6 major prophets since Adam who each brought Sharia to human beings. And when one of these 6 prophets would come, he would abrogate the Sharia of the prior prophet and institute a new Sharia. This continues until the period of Muhammad. And Muhammad brought his Sharia, the Imams interpret that, and eventually Muhammad's era, which could last anywhere from 500 to 1500 years, that will come to a close, and a 7th figure called the Qaim al-Qiyama, what others call the Mahdi, he will come, and he will reveal the inner, esoteric, spiritual meaning of all the different laws, of all the revelations. What's interesting is the Ismailis almost agreed that this Qaim figure who comes at the end of Muhammad's period, he will abolish the Sharia. Now this, of course, leads to questions. Well, what does that mean? Can you really abolish the Sharia? Is this antinomianism? So when they were pressed on this, various Ismaili thinkers explained, and it's in the blue code for those who want to read it themselves, but I'll show it by a diagram. They explained that the Sharia has 2 parts, the rational Sharia and the imposed Sharia. The rational Sharia are basically laws without which human society would crumble, would go to chaos. So the laws for safeguarding property, wealth, inheritance, the laws about marriage, laws against murder and stealing, and this sort of thing. That without these, human society couldn't function. That's called the rational, the Aqli Sharia, and that Sharia cannot be abrogated. It will always be in some form. But then, the Sharia also includes practices and gestures whose main benefit, according to the Ismailis, lies not in the physical performance of the act, but in the esoteric meaning of the act, in the knowledge that the act symbolizes. That was called the imposed Sharia. And the basic idea is that when the Qaim comes and this new era of Qiyama occurs, once again, not to be confused with the end of the world, but we're talking about sort of like an enlightened era. When that era of Qiyama comes, the imposed Sharia will be abrogated. And this was seen to be by the Ismailis as a future event that was greatly anticipated. So then how does this sort of play out? Well, as it turns out, in the 12th century, the Nizari is now following the schism among the Ismailis themselves. The Nizari Ismailis have a special event happening in 1164 where their Imam, Hassan al-Azi for Islam, declares Qiyamah. And he actually says that on this day, We're now in the Qiyama, and the Imam has relieved you from the burdens of the Sharia. Now, of course, we ask, what does this mean? And people like Juvaini and others have accused the Ismailis of antinomianism on this count. But what this actually meant, firstly, was only the imposed Sharia was abolished. There was no lawlessness. And worship was not abolished. Ibadat was not abolished. Rather, Ibadat was practiced in a more spiritual form, through more sort of contemplative practices. And we actually have the testimony of Tusi, writing in one of his Ismaili texts, where he says, and I point to the underlying words there, the age of Qiyama is when specific times of worship are abrogated, when people are summoned unto God for His own sake, and when all moments of life are completely absorbed in the practice of devotion. So what that practically meant is, yes, the ritual Sharia has been abolished, but what the Ismailis at this time were doing is they were practicing a more spiritual, esoteric form of each of the pillars of Islam. So rather than doing Salah at 5 specific times of the day, they were trying to undertake the discipline of being in the perpetual state of prayer through continuous dhikr or remembrance of God. Rather than fasting, for 30 days in Ramadan, they were undertaking what they call the true fast, which is keeping all of one's organs away from what God has prohibited, throughout all days of the year. So Qiyama actually meant the elevation of worship to sort of like a higher form of discipline. Now, this didn't last. In the early 1200s, another later Nizari Imam, Jalal bin Hassan, reinstituted the Sharia for the Nizari Ismailis, and not the Ismaili Sharia, but the Shafi Sunni madhab. And this was done so the Nizari Ismailis, who have a fortress state in Persia and were politically isolated, so they could build an alliance with the Abbasids and ultimately face the Mongols together. And when this new sort of Sunni Sharia was instituted, the whole Ismaili community interpreted this as taqiyya, as a sense of the community veiling its true beliefs for pragmatic purposes. And that's how it was interpreted. Following, of course, during the same time, this idea of continuous prayer and continuous fasting, that still was there, but it was done more discreetly. And it seems that in this period and later, when the Mongols came, they destroyed the Nizari state. And following that destruction, most Ismailis in Persia and other places had to do intense taqiyya. So outwardly, they practiced as Sunnis, as Sunni Sufis, as Nashris, and in India as certain types of things. And it seems like at that time, during this taqiyya period, if an Ismaili had spiritually reached the level of the haqiqah, of the inner meaning of the Sharia, they could dispense with the certain Sharia rituals. At least that's what we find stated in the sources that we have. So it seems like the idea of Sharia and Qiyama, where Sharia is abrogated, became a purely individual matter for the Nizari Ismailis in this later medieval period. Now things start to change in the 1800s. Aga Khan I, who was given the title by the Qajars, he moves to India, where there's already a Ismaili community that has itself been practicing taqiyya for some time through various forms. And the Aga Khan tells this community known as the Khojas to come out of taqiyya, to declare openly that they are Shia Ismaili, that they're not Hindu, that they're not Sunni. And there's 2 court cases where the identity of the Aga Khan and the Khoja Ismailis is challenged. The Aga Khan wins both cases. In one case, it's Aga Khan III. But the point is that at the end of the 19th century, this taqiyya practice is fully concluded. And by the time of Aga Khan III, he actually reestablished his ties with other Ismaili communities in Persia and Syria, and he explicitly abrogates the Sharia worship rituals that they had been doing as an act of taqiyya up until that point. Now, that doesn't mean there were no other rituals. Rather, the rituals that the Ismailis had been doing in utmost secretly, consisting of things like dhikr and another prayer called dua, these became congregational rituals for the whole community to do. That sort of leads us to the contemporary period, where you don't have Sharia rituals, but you do have rituals, a different kind. You don't have fiqh, but you do have something else, known what they call Ismaili constitutions. So you have these documents called Ismaili constitutions, which lay out rules and regulations and some personal rules of conduct for Ismaili Muslims. The Aga Khans approved all of these documents, and the latest one is dated 1998, applies to all Ismailis everywhere. These constitutions are seen as authoritative by the Ismaili community. They make reference to the Imam as the sole authority to prescribe anything, but they also defer to secular nation-state laws. Like the laws of the nation-state still take precedence over the rules in the Constitution. Another important thing is today the Ismailis and the Imam, they designate the Ismaili interpretation and practice of Islam not as a madhab, but as a tariqah. And the Ismaili ritual practice is often situated, as you can tell from this quote of the Aga Khan, alongside Sufi practices like Khanaqah and Zawiyah. It's never situated alongside Sharia practices or madhabs. Even when the Aga Khan was required to make a legal identification of the Nizari Ismailis, he refused to identify with one madhab that said our historic adherence to the Jafari madhab and other madhab of close affinity. And historically, that would be a true statement. So as a final point then, what does this say about Sharia? Is there no Ismaili Sharia? Have the Ismailis dispensed with Sharia? It depends on how we are defining Sharia. This distinction between Sharia as God's law, or God's ordaining, and fiqh as the fallible jurist interpretation of it, does not subsist in Ismaili thought. The Ismailis don't recognize any legitimacy for any fiqh beyond what the Imam says. So what we do have is we have the Aga Khan still taking the view that Islam guides a person's whole life. And what the Aga Khan has been doing is he's been giving guidance in the form of verbal addresses to the community, and the premises of that guidance is what he calls the ethics of Islam. So as a final point, I would just observe that what the Aga Khan calls the ethics of Islam, premised on the principle of quality of life, in my view, coincides with what the juristic discourse calls the maqasid al-Sharia and the principle of maslahah. So perhaps there is an Ismaili conceptualization of Sharia, but it's Sharia as ethics and not Sharia as fiqh. Thank you all very much.